All right, peace and blessings, and welcome to another episode of the Self-Publishing 30 Days podcast, Author Spotlight. I'm your host, Rob YB Youngblood, President of Sales for Self-Publishing 30 Days, and I have the pleasure of speaking with Joi Fisher-Griffin. Did I get that correct, Joi?
Absolutely.
I'll make sure I give everybody's government name the right thing.
Yes, I appreciate it.
I don't want no problem. I don't want no smoke. So, but Joi, welcome to the podcast. Would love to learn more about you and your work. But before we get started, tell me just a little bit about yourself.
Briefly, I'm an educator of over 25 years. I'm an adoption advocate, and I'm an author, and recently an author of 2 best-selling children's books. So I'm excited about to share with you today the things that I've learned in your audience, the things that I've learned about adoption.
Yeah,
and
please.
And my catchphrase has been, let's stop whispering and let's talk adoption.
Oh, I love that. Let's stop whispering and let's talk adoption. Now, there's a specific reason why adoption is important to you. Tell the listeners why that is.
Yeah, I am an adult adoptee. I'm an adult adoptee. I am now in reunion, a 4-year, I guess it's been 4-year reunion with my birth parents, both my birth mother and my birth father. I am a beneficiary of the legislation in New Jersey changing so that adoptees' previously closed records could be opened. So I received the benefit of that based on advocates long before me who were fighting in the state of New Jersey for 34 years to get legislation changed to allow us access to our original birth certificates. And each state is different. So depending on where you live, you would have to go online to look. There's actually a really good website, Adoptee Rights Law, and you can look up your state to figure out what the years of the legislation that it covers. For instance, in New Jersey, if you were born between 1940 and 2015, your records were closed. So as of 2017, legislation made the change and allowed us to now apply to receive our original birth certificate. The flip side to that is that prior to legislation being implemented, birth parents had an opportunity to say, I don't want my name given to my birth child or my biological child. So they could redact their information. So they had a window of time where they had to make that decision. And what would happen as an adoptee, you would still apply for your original birth certificate, and you would get your original birth certificate, and just clearly blacked out would be your birth mother or your birth father's name. So that was one of the caveats to them approving the legislation in the state of New Jersey. So because that information on my birth certificate was not blocked out, I was able to find my birth mother through the help of Facebook, through the help of Google, and by also connecting with some relatives through DNA. And so, and some of my DNA connections took place 2 years or a year and a half prior to the legislation even changing.
Right.
But I've always known that I was adopted. Always had thoughts of finding my birth mother. Never really thought about, not that I didn't think about my birth father, but wasn't sure if that was going to happen because you didn't know what was going on in that time. So I'm at a completely different place. Although I knew that I was adopted at age 2 months, and I found out before I went off to kindergarten, it wasn't something that we spoke a lot about. It wasn't something that was common conversation. It wasn't something that you heard about often in school or anything. And it wasn't until on a whim, I went down to the legislative hearing, to the announcement, to figure out what the heck was going to go on. They're saying that legislation is about to change, but what did that really mean for me as a person, the lay person, just sitting there as the law was about to change? So I thought it was important that day to just go to the hearing, to the celebration, and to the announcement. And I did that, and was glad that I did, because that was the first time in my late 40s that I had been around adult adoptees, adopted parents, and birth parents who actually sat around the table and talked about adoption as if you were just talking about, going out somewhere.
Right.
And as they're telling their stories, I'm in tears. I mean, the tears are falling. I'm crying just listening, because all the stories are not positive. And then some people had some challenges over their lifetime. So to hear them just say the stories just so matter-of-factly, I said, I need to find out who these people are. I need to find out, how did they get to that healing place to be able to tell their story where they're not crying. I'm sitting here crying. And again, first time, 40 something years old, that I had been around other adoptees, adopted parents, and birth parents. And I just wanted to know more about who they were and what they did. And throughout that evening was when I found out that they had been fighting for over 34 years for legislation to change. And some of them weren't even adopted in New Jersey, but the work they were doing was impacting the state of New Jersey.
Mhm.
And I wanted to find out, how did you get to that healing pace? And, you know, we make jokes about, and when you say, who are you? And I want to say, I'm Joi and I'm an adult adoptee. That's how we start off, you know, our support groups.
Right.
And that's when I realized that that was a big key to my healing process. And the day that I sat at that table with them, I said, if I can get to the place where they are and share my journey with somebody else, if it's impacting me this way, how much is it going to impact another young person? How much is it going to impact another adult who's struggling in a relationship because they just don't feel worthy? How much is it going to impact someone else who's walking around confused about their identity if we just start talking about this stuff as if it was a matter of fact, the way that they did that day? So that's really been the mission that I've been on, is to share my journey. And the journey really isn't about finding my birth parents. It's about the journey along the way of understanding my identity, understanding that I am lovable, understanding that I am worthy, and just, you know, improving my self-esteem to be able to even do this work and be able to go out and share my story.
You know, I love it. Your passion. I'm a crier, so I'm doing my best not to cry. I'll be honest, because, you know, I grew up in a single parent home. My father was actually murdered when I was 2. And so while that's not anything near the experience of being adopted, I would always wonder if my mom was my real mom. And the reason why I would say that is because I had a cousin who had the same last name as I did. And our relationship was a lot more, like, we had a stronger tie than my birth mom, right? And so I used to always wonder, like, is this my real mom? Because, like, we got a lot of beef going on. But what I had to realize was that my father, prior to me being born, had a certain way about him, right? He had some abusive tendencies, and so my mom had to overcome that trauma in order for her to, you know, to show me love, right? So, but even now, it's like, you know, my wife and I, we have 2 beautiful daughters, and she said it's a wrap. Like, she said, we're not having no more kids, and I'm like, what? Like, I need some boys, right? So the only way that that's probably gonna happen is I'm probably gonna have to go somewhere in Africa to find my sons, or maybe go back up to the Bronx and find my sons. But I say that because adoption is so critical to helping people get into an environment where they do have love, but not everybody has that experience, right? I mean, you know, some people get into adoptive relationships and their family structure is not as strong. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. Everybody's experience is different. A couple things that you pointed out is, as you were talking about being a child of a single parent, as many people, as the people that have read my book, my memoir, that's one of the things that stands out, is that some of the similarities of some of our challenges or our issues when you have an absent parent that are similar to adoptees. So that's something that comes up a lot. And I was glad to hear you mention the word trauma, that you recognize that what mom was dealing with was trauma. And for adoptees, that's something we need the world to understand, that it's a traumatic experience for us. We were raised and born and carried by a birth mother who, for whatever reasons, decided to relinquish her rights to us. And that's a traumatic situation. And everyone often says, well, oh, well, you were adopted at 2 months. You can't recall any of that. Well, don't we talk to birth mothers, or to mothers, period, when they're carrying their children? We say, play music. We say, make sure you talk to your child. We tell birth fathers, talk to the baby that's in your wife's belly or your significant other's belly, because we know that research tells us that that has an impact. So why is it that when adoptees who are relinquished at a younger age, people think that it doesn't have an impact? That's part of trauma. And I think that's another piece that I hope to share as I speak with different audiences, is that it is a traumatic experience. It is a loss. And if we begin to look at it that way, we can reflect on how we speak about adoption, and how we also, you know, just comments that we make, that may be insensitive that people don't even think about. The other piece you mentioned is that, you want to find your boy somewhere. And with that, that's the issue too, especially in the Black community, because we don't talk about it. People don't know, well, where would I go if I wanted to find out about adoption? How do I even, get into ask any questions, or how can I go somewhere and not feel pressured? So those are the things that I think if we open up and normalize the conversation about adoption, that gives people to find that community. It gives prospective adoptive parents to find that place to go. It gives current adoptive parents a place to find their support groups.
Yeah.
So normalizing the conversation really just impacts everybody in general.
I love it. I love it. So tell us about your books. I know you mentioned you had 2 books. Could you tell us about your books? Give us the title and what your books are about.
Yeah, Finding Joy, a True Story of Faith, Family, and Love is my memoir. And I wrote about my adoption journey. I wrote about my struggles. As I shared earlier, when I went to that adoption legislation event, I realized that me struggling with identity, self-esteem, feeling that people would just leave, that fear of abandonment, all those are adoption issues. And those are issues that children of single parents also have, where there's an absent parent as well. So I realized those are issues that come along with this journey that I've been placed on, that I just thought were weird about me or different about me. And so those are some things that I've been trying to figure out along the way as well. And give me your question one more time.
No. So you told me about Finding Joy. So that's your memoir. And then you also have a children's book, correct?
Yeah, I wrote 2 children's books that came out this summer, Choosing Joi, An Adoptee's Journey, and Finding Belonging. One of the things you'll hear adoptees talk about is trying to find your path and finding that sense of belonging, because you feel out of place, and recognizing that not only do you feel out of place, that it's okay to feel out of place, because you are out of place.
That's
You're
right.
being raised in a family that is not your biological family. And things that I thought that were weird or quirky about me, now that I've met my birth parents, I'm like, okay, this all lines up. It makes sense. It wasn't making sense to me because I wasn't around people who were really, when I was younger, long and lanky and had long legs and, big foreheads and everything else. But then when I met them, I'm like, okay, it all makes sense. And the other book is Singing with Joy. When I met my birth mother before her church, she actually gave her testimony in front of her church and introduced me to herself, but also introduced me to her congregation. And she sang a solo just before she did that. My father leaned into me while she was singing. He said, "That's where you get your voice from." And I'm like, wow, and that was something that I was afraid to show when I was younger, because nobody else really sang. And so singing has just been important to me, writing music and writing poetry and lyrics. And I think that through singing, we can hook kids into a rhythm, into a beat. And lyrically, if the lyrics make sense and can tell a story about being different, but also that you belong, that every kind of family makes sense.
Right.
So those are really the key features or the key aspects of the book that I wanted to highlight of the children's books, is that everybody's family looks different. And we're talking about everything else under the sun in schools, and kids are talking about everything else on social media.
Right.
So why can't we talk about adoption? Why can't we talk about, 2 men adopting a child, people of different races adopting a child? We have to start having these conversations and stop shying away from them. And as I said, stop whispering, and let's talk adoption, because I'll present in a number of places. And I came up with that phrase because I would present, and then afterwards, people would always come up to me, "Oh, I enjoyed, and I never thought about this that way." And that's always a great thing to hear when people walk away with perspective. But to hear them say, "And by the way, I have," and then they start whispering about the relative in their family who doesn't know that they're adopted, or the relative who knows, but nobody still talks about it.
Right.
And so I said, why is it that they were fine in the conversation the other time, but as soon as it came to that adoption statement, everybody starts whispering.
I can appreciate that, and I want to be a part of your tribe to get more people to talk about it, because I think it's so important. We have friends that have adopted children. Our mentors, my wife and I, we have mentors who they adopted a beautiful young girl from Africa, We have a couple other families that have adopted some children. And so, for me, it's not foreign. Like, it's not a foreign idea. Obviously, my wife has to be on board. My children have to be on board if we decide to go that route. But I think it's definitely something that we have to talk about. So Joi, tell us, when it came to writing your books, because you have a wide array, right? So you have your memoirs, you have your children's books. What was your biggest challenge with writing your books? I mean, obviously, this is a sensitive topic, right? You said it took you a while to get to a point where you would stop crying, right? What was the biggest challenge as in becoming an author and writing about these topics for you? What was the biggest challenge for you?
The biggest challenge for me in writing was less of the writing part, because I'm a journal writer. When things are happening in my life, whether I'm jotting it down in a calendar, if I'm jotting it in a little notebook, you will always see me with something that I'm writing on. And in putting the book together, that's what I use. I went back to all of my journals from high school on into my adulthood. And I think the challenging part was putting the pieces together,
Mhm.
making decisions on what you're going to put in, what you're not going to put in, and structure, really structure and putting the book together. And
Yeah.
I think having an outside eye is also important. So if you can hire someone or have someone to come on board to help you look at that information as well, because sometimes and if you are a writer, you can just write forever, but
Right.
everybody doesn't need to hear every little detail. So having somebody who could really help me streamline thousands of journal entries was very helpful
Yeah,
in
I
the
love it.
process.
I love it. I love it. So as we begin to land the plane, I want to ask one of the questions that I love asking people that I interview, and that is, when you plan to write your next book, right? Say, for example, you get ready to write your next book, and you had the option to go anywhere in the world to write this book, and let's say self-publish in 30 days, myself, my team, we were going to pay for it. Where would you travel to write your next best-selling book? Where would you go?
Wow.
If
I
we were
don't
if we were paying for it, if we was paying for it, we said, listen, you can go as long as you want, as long as you need, anywhere in the world. Where would you go to write your next book?
I had a really good experience years ago in Cancun, and I found it to be very relaxing. And when you're in the resorts and everything else, everything was taken care of. Uh, and there were spaces and you had places where you could go and have your moments away of solitude, and just I don't know. I think part of the atmosphere and the environment also made it exciting.
Mhm.
But as a writer, I can't have everything completely silent. So I need to have some action going on, and then
Yeah.
and find some things that inspire me. So, but Cancun, Mexico was the last place that I really, really enjoyed. I'm not a big traveler. As a single mom for quite some time with three girls, that wasn't something that was always available to us, but
Right.
something I hope to look forward doing in the future.
Well, when you said Cancun, I automatically was taken to my wife and I. We celebrated our 10-year wedding anniversary in Cancun, and it was a beautiful trip. And so yeah. So I was taken there, and I'm like, I want to go back. Like, I want to go back
Yes.
now.
Yep.
So I want to go back now. So tell us, Joi, where can we find you? Say, for example, if folks want to support your mission, they want to be a part of your community, or just be a support, buy your books or what have you. Where can they purchase your books? Where can they find you?
Yeah, my books are on Amazon. You can find more information on my website, findingjoi.us, and that's Joy with an I. And on all social media, I'm Finding Joi Renee. And through all of those, and through the website, donations can actually be made to get the children's books into classes. That's one of my goals, because I think our children are where the conversation starts. And with the children's books, I've actually written lesson plans. So I have lesson plans and some coloring sheets to make it more engaging, because we can't ask educators to step out there on this topic and then not give them any insight in terms
That's
of where
right.
they should be going with conversation and definitions of terms, because adoption sensitivity is very key. So I give a framework of how it can be done in a classroom. So if people would like to donate so that we can support and send those books out to schools, that is really a big part of my mission. And I call that the Belong Project, because we want to make sure kids know around the world that they belong. They belong in this space.
Love it. You've been such a great a pleasure to have on the Author Spotlight. So grateful that you were willing to be transparent and sharing where you've come from, and you're going to impact so many lives as you've already done already. So thank you again for being a part of the Self-Publishing 30 Days podcast. You're officially a part of our family, so we appreciate you. For those of you who've been listening, connect with Joi, get connected to her, let her know that you heard about her here on the podcast. And just remember, be encouraged, be blessed, but most of all, continue to share your faith. And the way that you do that is by walking in your gift, because your gift will make room for you. We'll see you next time. Peace.